Just be prepared for those who you thought had you dropping you. Those who, when you were a reporter and a host, which so many females are, were very supportive of you and told you were great. And, like people in the business, my colleagues and coaches and whatnot. And suddenly when you're in a space that they don't necessarily think you deserve or are good enough for, although how could you be? Because how do you become a qualified candidate when you can't gain experience because of a lack of opportunity? And that's what that is. Every man has seen themselves represented as head coaches, players, GMs, executives in the NHL, because that's all there has been up until a certain point. They understand that opportunity exists. And there's, from the grassroots level up of being your kids coach all the way to the NHL, you have the opportunity to learn and gain experience to become a qualified candidate. I did not have that in play-by-play. I had to create my own opportunities and push through. And it's the one thing I'll give myself credit for is that.
Hello, everybody. This is the Winning in Winnipeg podcast, where I talk to top performing business owners, executives, entrepreneurs, and local Winnipeg celebrities. I get to learn who they are and how they think, and I get to hear their perspective about what's really going on in Winnipeg and in their businesses. Today, I have the pleasure of having an absolute trailblazer on the show. Leah Hextall is an ESPN play-by-play commentator for the NHL. In March 2020, she became the first female to call play-by-play for a nationally televised NHL game, and before that was the first woman to call an NCAA men's ice hockey championship game for ESPN. Everyone who watches hockey or even just the Jets know who she is, so I'm excited to have her here and to dive into what has made her successful and hopefully get advice for anyone out there wanting to follow in her footsteps. It is fantastic finally having you here.
It is so great to see you. As we were saying, it feels like another life ago that my first spin in Winnipeg, as I call it, that's when I met you. So just when you reached out, I was like, oh my goodness, what a blast from the past, but in such a good way.
So you were with CTV, right?
I was. Yeah. I was the weekend sports anchor and reporter. So I would do late nights and weekends. So obviously I had a life, as you can imagine, when you're working those kind of hours, but we still managed to have fun back in our younger days. Yeah. And I was with CTV for 7 years here in Winnipeg before I moved on to Boston.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So during my diving into seeing what Leah Hextall was up to over the last little bit, I got a chance to see a presentation that you gave, and holy shit, it was heavy, very. And I want to dive into it. I want to touch on parts of it throughout this interview. But first, let's give the audience just a little bit of kind of who you are, where you're from. You're from Brandon originally, right?
I consider Brandon home. I grew up there. I moved there when I was 11. Okay. And you have your developmental years, as I call them, because you go right through till high school. And the friends I made there are still very much my best friends today. And my family is still there. So it will always be home, in my opinion. But I was actually born in Portage Prairie, left there when I was 4 to move up to northern Manitoba to Flin Flon, where we spent 6 years, and we still go up on summer fishing trips. And it is still the most beautiful, untouched part of our province that you can experience. If you haven't been to northern Manitoba, you gotta go because it's unreal. And then we moved my dad got a job in Brandon, and it was just time to leave the north, even though we loved it, because my sister and I were playing so many sports and we were starting to make provincial teams. And it's very difficult to be 10 hours away from where practices and whatnot were going on. So they bit the bullet and brought us to Brandon. And so Brandon is home, and I'm happy to only be 2 hours down the highway from my mom and my sister and my friends. So it's a nice experience to be home. It's not where I thought I would end up being at this point in my life, but it's working.
And you're in Winnipeg now.
I am
situated here. You're here for
There's
a
an
while.
Airport.
Okay.
And I need an airport that flies, even though
we are now the hub for WestJet.
We are a hub for WestJet. I'm a Delta girl. They're partners.
Ooh, okay. Yeah.
I am a Delta girl. She's the queen to me. She gets me everywhere I need. I knock on wood. My luggage shows up. I'm on time. It's great. And as anyone who travels from Winnipeg knows, especially because for my job, I go down to the US weekly. it is Connection City. So it's a drop down to Mini and then going out to wherever my game is.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of travel, but from Winnipeg. So there has been some thought in my head. Do I move back to Toronto? Do I go somewhere where I can have easier travel? But this right now is working. And besides my left hip and lower back being a problem since I started traveling so much, it's good.
Are you Nexus? Are you something higher that I've never even heard of?
No, I'm Nexus. Nexus is it's a big one because it gives you TSA in the States, which is something that you have to have. You have to have it when you're traveling a lot. I tell people, even if you travel once a year within Canada, get a Nexus because you still get to go to the priority lane. It's only $50 for like 5 years.
I know.
It's nothing.
I did notice that.
It's nothing.
And most credit cards will just be like every few years, they'll just give you a free Nexus.
And it's just, and then if you do go to the States, it's just so helpful. Honestly, I couldn't do my job without it, I don't think. So this is not an advertisement for Nexus, but it's definitely something you have to have if you're going to be traveling a lot.
Well, we've already did a shout out to Delta. We've done a shout out to Nexus.
I'm trying to get, the Delta one's
a
big one. I'm trying to get my diamond status right now. I'm chasing it. It's towards the end of the year. I'm not going to make it. I'm still going to be a platinum girl and I'm so disappointed. I'm so like, oh geez, you can't even, and I told you I was professional and I already bumped the mic.
It's not a pro mic, so it doesn't go along with your
talk with my hands apparently. But yeah, I'm not going to make it. I know I'm not going to make it. I've taken that in.
You've accepted it.
Yeah. And it sucks because one thing bad about Delta is that you can't get their credit card if you're a Canadian. And if I had their credit card and was using their credit card, God, you wouldn't be able to stop me. I'd be at the highest level ever. So instead, it's just my flights. And so these are the things when you travel, it becomes all about points. It becomes all about status. It is everything. Getting that upgrade changes your whole day.
Are you able to share kind of the journey from being a local TV reporter here in Winnipeg? And I know that's not actually where you started, but that was, from what I think, your first really big gig to becoming really international, TSN, NHL reporter, or ESPN, sorry. So what were the key milestones for you there?
Well, I think the biggest break of my career was actually my very first job, which was in Brandon. One, it was huge because I got it right out of school. I wasn't even finished my broadcast program yet, which was massive because so many people I knew did not get a job at a school or did not ever get into the industry because it is extremely competitive.
And you were in Vancouver?
I was in Vancouver because Red River would not accept me into their program. So let's just be very clear about that.
No shout out to Red River today.
Yeah, I've had people come up to me because they have an incredible program and I love them, but they'll come when I was working in Winnipeg and ask me to present awards at their year end and I would politely pass. Yeah. And I remember Ace Burpee saying to me, Hextall, why won't you do this? I told him the story. I said, listen, they didn't accept me. He goes, yep, warranted. So I was like, yeah. So still to this day, I'm like, if you didn't want me then, you don't get me now.
You beat Ace Burpee on this show, just so you know.
Did I?
You win.
He's one of my favorites.
He's awesome.
Talk about a legacy.
He's a staple.
Look at how squirrel, and I just go totally different direction. But so Brandon was my biggest break because the second part was I was in a community that I knew. I grew up playing sports in Brandon and in Westman. I knew how important the Brandon Wheat Kings were. I knew how important the Bobcats were. And then on top of that, I had to do everything. I had to edit my own stories after a Wheat King game. I had to create my own graphics. I had to produce my own show. So you're wearing all these hats, which one just made you better because it allowed you to learn and gain experience.
And you get the perspective of everyone's job, which means that you can empathize a lot easier with all of them, and you can.
And I'm a big believer that, as much experience as you can get, you should get. Every time somebody offers, hey, do you want to try this? Even if you don't know what you're doing, just say yes. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out and don't be scared of it. So that was such a big job for me. And then from there, got hired at CTV Winnipeg, was there for 7 years, really felt, it was a huge experience as well because I started covering professional sports. You're covering the CFL. It's my first time in locker rooms. I'll never forget walking in a locker room and seeing a bunch of naked men. That was a totally new experience for me.
I'll never forget
I know,
that
right?
Yeah.
And just being like, oh my goodness. And, my first time in a CFL locker room with the Bombers, Miners, the legend Milt Stegall was playing. And it was after practice, and I came out, and he wasn't fully geared down, but enough, and if I was Milt, I'd be geared down too. He's a specimen of a man.
He is.
And everybody was in what we call scrum. When you see a bunch of reporters with their mics, and we call that a scrum in the business. And so we're standing there asking questions. I'm not asking any question because I really didn't know much about football. I'm just learning. Yeah. I dropped my mic. Like first day on the job. And then he looked at me and he said, "Are you going to get it or am I?" And I've got all these men. I'm the only woman. I've got all these men around me. And I'm just standing there like, this is a moment. Like, this is a moment, Hextall. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I got it. And I just went like this, and I bent down and I grabbed the mic and I stood back up and I put it back into the scrum. And I'm sure my face was burning red. And, phenomenal. But those were like the little things. And, then covering the American League, and then being in the room when the Jets came back to this day, being able to ask Mark Chipman, what does it mean to you to bring the heart back, to Winnipeg and the province, and just being in that room. And it was so great. And, was there for 7 years. And then I think the biggest break was getting my job in Boston, working for the New England Sports Network known as NESN. Suddenly I'm interviewing Tom Brady. I'm on the right field roof deck of Fenway watching the Red Sox win the World Series as I'm doing my nightly sports show. It's just all they do is win there, right? So it was just an incredible time. And then that led me to Sportsnet getting the rights for hockey and, taking over Hockey Night in Canada, offering me a job as a host. And it was one of those weird things because they came to me. And so Boston really put me on the map. Whereas in Winnipeg, I had stints with TSN, filled in. They liked me, but nobody was taking that shot on me nationally here. But going to Boston, they realized, oh, she can do this on a big stage. And I got so much better when I was down there. And so suddenly I have this job and I'm in the press release, hockey's biggest names, along with Kelly Rudy and Ron McLean and all these massive names. I'm like, what? So that was a huge moment, especially because when I walked through the doors of CKX in Brandon, the goal was to hold a hockey night mic. And so to be able to be in the institution that allowed me to do that was really big. But unfortunately, 2 years in, I got laid off with half the staff because of economics. And then I couldn't find a job in the industry and had to really pivot. So, all those experiences just led up to it. But Winnipeg was, those 7 years, by the time I left, I was ready to leave. I felt like I couldn't do anything more here. I thought if I can't do one more sports star of the week, I can't put together one more weekend broadcast. I've done this. I have the skill. Either I'm going to get a new job soon, or I was in that spot where it's time to end in media and, maybe go into a different path. But it just happened to work out.
Go build houses.
That's right. Exactly. Do that transition, which came later in my life, after Sportsnet for a while. But, it was such a big thing being here in Winnipeg, and just, my first 10 years of my career was in my home province. And I don't think a lot of people can say that's how they began. Yeah.
What are the biggest differences between working in Winnipeg and, say, Boston, but anywhere for that matter?
I think local sports here really matters in a way that, in some other maybe major city centers, you don't know as much about. So the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, the MMJHL, the high school system, you are speaking to an audience where someone's grandma is tuning into you every night to hear about their grandson's game. And it's unfortunate because across the board, we have our local media is dying, and it is an epidemic to our society, to our democracy. And I'm not even being dramatic there. It is something that, when we can't get information now because of laws in which our federal government is doing, and we can't get information from the United States right now on social media platforms, those are things that individuals need to perk up and go, okay, because that information from journalism is so important, and that's what actually brings about change. It also gives people a release. I'm in the entertainment industry. I'm not in the sports industry. I'm in the entertainment industry. When people tune in to watch sports, I'm there to educate and entertain. And I have always felt that was my job, because I'm not the heavy. I'm not talking about, murders, or I couldn't believe when my news friends had to go knock on doors after someone had lost someone. I'm just not built that way. It's, not something I could do on my worst day or best day. But, it's amazing that, in Winnipeg, because there is just this, small sense of community, even though we are a city. You still have that, very limited degrees of separation to knowing someone.
Yeah.
And so I think doing news here, sports here, even though it was considered a major market, it still felt small, and that you really needed to put focus on what mattered to the communities within the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a few key members in your family,
Mm-hmm.
obviously big into hockey and,
Yes.
and well-known names. So I can understand how hockey became big in your life, or it started big in your life. But when did you realize it was actually a passion of yours? Like, when did it become Leah's versus the family's?
Yes. That's a great question because, I never played. And I think people automatically assume because I was a Hextall that I played.
What sports did you play?
I never played. I played everything else. I was really big into, I did gymnastics when I was young for a really long time, but then I got into volleyball, basketball. I was, ball has been in my life since I was in T-ball at 4 years old. It was a huge thing for our summers. That's what we did. So, I was really big into badminton. A lot of people always, but, badminton's still one of my very favorite sports.
Side note, I got kicked off the badminton team from high school for celebrating too much.
What?
Yeah. If you do the canoe too many times, they just get out.
See, I never did that, but when my partner and I won to get into the provincial final, my partner Jill and I like did a body bump on her when we won, and almost knocked her over because she was smaller than me. But she was like, "Oh my God, you can't celebrate like that." I was like, "Yes, we can."
I learned that the hard way. Yeah.
Exactly. So I didn't grow up playing, but except for the local rink, grabbing a stick and skates and playing shinny or playing street hockey. That's all I knew. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know anything. But my cousin Ron was playing in my youth. When I was 8, his career started. And in his rookie year, he went to the Stanley Cup final with the Philadelphia Flyers against Gretzky's Oilers. And it just kind of really made me aware that I was a Hextall. And then from there, just when I moved really to Brandon, and we weren't as isolated as we were at North, especially Brandon being Brandon, we're very close to where the Hextalls kind of came from.
Yeah.
And the fact that my cousin had played with the Wheat Kings and I had an uncle who did. And, my dad played junior hockey with Portage and won a national championship. So we're down in this area in Poplar Point where they were all born. And that's right in between Winnipeg and Portage. For those of you who don't know, it's a map dot, but it's a great little place. But, it used to be Hextall land. You go through there and the lumberyard was there with the word Hextalls. And, when you have 3 generations, the first one being a Hall of Famer and my grandfather coming out of there, such a small place, it's huge, right? So I started to hear a lot of stories. Oh, I knew, your uncle, your grandfather, your dad. And everywhere I went when someone met me and I said my last name, "Oh, are you related to the hockey player?" And I never knew which one they were going to say.
Right. Yeah.
So it became very clear to me that I was a Hextall. I've sat around kitchen tables hearing many stories. And they're great. I've heard a lot of them more than once. But when I think it became my passion was when I actually got my job in Brandon, because I started covering the Wheat Kings. It became my beat. And the first time I went to a Wheat King game and I was up in the press box, I remember getting the stat sheet and I didn't know how to read it. And I went home that night because I was living with my parents because I was making $600 every 2 weeks. And I was living with my parents and I walked in and I just felt so defeated because I was like, this is fraudulent. I mean, I'm a Hextall, but I don't know this game. I like this game, but I don't know this game.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my dad, "What's icing?" And he sat down, put out a piece of paper, drew a rank, and took me through icing, offside, all the rules, power play setups. We must have sat there for probably hours, right? And every night we do that. He took me through the stat sheet, told me, this is what this means, and this is why this is important, and yada, yada. And so he was really my first teacher of the game. And then I just became such a student of it that from there, this passion came about because I wanted to be able to represent my family and carry on my last name in a true way in hockey. Yeah. And I think every Canadian loves hockey in a certain way, even if you're not a huge fan. We get behind the Olympics, we get behind the juniors because it brings us all together. It's more of a sense of community. But for me, I started to think, okay, this is something that I'm very interested in. And so I just really started to try to buckle down and learn. And I've really learned the game from the outside in, which is something I don't think a lot of people know. Mm-hmm. They just assume. So when I got to the point where I started doing play-by-play, you think you know the game, but do you know enough to narrate it? And there's still some periods where, something will happen, an infraction or whatnot. And I'm like, I didn't see it. I don't know. So, you just wait for the call. You wait to see what the official signals, and then that's the call, and away you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the best piece of advice when I was starting play-by-play. Actually, it was Maddie Calvert, who played former Brandon Wheat King and played in Columbus, a good Brandon boy. And I saw him in the summer. He said, congrats on your new job. It's amazing. And I was like, thanks, Maddie. I said, I'm a little nervous, feel like I'm maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome here because calling the game, I mean, I didn't play it. Like, do I know enough? And he said, Hextall, I don't even know where the face-off is supposed to be. And I play the game.
Yeah.
So that actually gave me...
just go where the refs.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me such a sense of, okay. But, it's always been around me, but the passion didn't really start until I became a broadcaster. And then that's when I started covering it on a day-to-day basis, being around the rink. And that's where, I just felt like it was my happy place. And I remember my mom finally saying to me, if this broadcast thing doesn't work out, you should get a job in hockey because that's where you're happiest, is around the rink.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little genetics too. I think there's a little bit of it in the blood. So yeah.
Well, it's a fast game, and play-by-play is insane and even faster.
Yeah.
So like, what are not only the challenges, but the responsibilities that come with having to work in such a fast-paced environment?
I don't think people...
Sorry, let alone live.
Yes. Sure. Yeah, exactly. Right. I don't think people realize how much work goes into play-by-play, because I certainly didn't until I started, thinking, okay, am I actually going to do this? It's not just about knowing the numbers and the names, even though that is your lifeblood. And that alone, especially when you're, listen, we all can watch the Jets and feel like we know every number and every name and every statistic. That's great. Do it for 32 teams. Because I'm not a regional girly. I'm a national girly. Mm-hmm. So that means that I'm bopping to different games, different teams every single week, sometimes twice a week when I'm, doing it in the season. So it's a great deal of work just to even learn the league. Now, was it easier in my second year? Absolutely. Because I had called enough teams, once or twice that when it would come again, I would go, okay, Seattle, I know that this number is this, and yet it just kind of was easier that way. But that's the lifeblood. So you have to get that down. Then you have to know, all the little things like, yes, the leading scorers, the leading goal scorers, because it's not enough just to call the game. You need to drop in the nuggets of information. You'll see the great play-by-plays like Chris Cuthbert and Gord Miller and whatnot, and they add that little nugget in as you're calling. Exactly.
Almost, yeah.
And then you need to know the storylines of the team, and you need to know all the coaches, and you need to know where they've coached before that, because you don't know what's going to come into play, because the game is the star and it's going to dictate what we're going to talk about. And then there's even knowing the trainers, knowing the doctors. And this was a great lesson for me when Chris Cuthbert was calling a Toronto Maple Leafs game and John Tavares got injured. I believe it was against Montreal, and the Montreal doctor came out as well as the Toronto doctor to tend to him. Yep. And either he did his job so well that he knew who those guys were by seeing them, because one, you don't know who's who. They don't have a uniform on with a number. Or he had a great producer in that chair who said that is who that is with a quick Google search to get him the info. But that taught me you need to know those. Right. So like I print off pictures of all the coaches, all the trainers, any of the behind the scenes staff, general managers, because what if we show them in the box and I got to talk about them? So there's just so much information. And then there's how many people fit in this rink? How many sellouts have they had? There's just, it's such an overwhelming process. And when you're new at it, like I am, you really have to find a way to just really streamline it. So, even though you do need to know all that, you really have to figure out what is truly important. And it's the names and the numbers, and then a nugget about each player. And then we'll go from there if we have time. So, that's kind of the difficult part, is the amount of preparation.
Yeah.
As soon as I'm done one game, I'm on to the next. There is no time to take a day off for me at this point. There are others who've been doing it for 20, 30 years. Yep, they can do that. And I only do one sport. I'm around play-by-plays at ESPN that bounce. I got guys right now like Bob Wischusen, who I work with when I report. He's my play-by-play. And he's bouncing from calling the New York Jets on the radio to then doing college football to dropping in and doing a hockey game. And yes, he's been doing it for 30 years and he's magnificent. But I look at people like that and it blows my mind how they can just compute it because I'm still in my infant stages. So it's a tremendous amount of work. And then you add the speed. As soon as you gone, that puck is boop, and it's gone. And it's in the net. Right. And, that's the biggest thing I'm working on right now is my goal calls. Just that anticipation of the shot. Because suddenly you're in neutral ice and boom, boom, and it's shot and it's over. And, you can see me get animated as I start to talk about it because I can see it in my head. Like I'm, because I need to get my call where my voice can ascend and then descend if it's not going in and then stay up there if it does.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes, there's so much traffic. You don't know if it's in, you don't know if it's out. It's amazing how much I appreciate the people who are so good at it because I know how hard it is. And it's just something that I feel very fortunate that I get a more consistent opportunity to do now. And I know I have so much work still to do in it, but it's just the fact that there's actually an opportunity because prior to me, there hadn't been.
Yeah. Which we're going to dive into. That's phenomenal. You know, what's funny is when you talk about that, I didn't really like watching baseball until I heard Dan Schulman.
Nice.
And I don't know what it was. I don't know if I was working out and listening to it. I don't know if I saw it on TV or just at work and I was listening. I kind of, I don't know if it's voice, but then the stories and like the backgrounds and like, I was like, oh my goodness, that's what really trapped me about it. And so when you're talking about, the inflection in your voice and painting the picture for people, even as they're watching it, but you're creating a different storyline almost for them, that's absolutely insane.
And in baseball, the ability to tell a story, you have so much more time there. So you really do need to be a storyteller. It's why Vince Scully was so good at it.
Fast-paced
exactly.
Right?
But it's still a different challenge because there's so much air to fill. How do you entertain? I know they've got the clock now, but I mean, baseball is a long game. And so I really, there can be so much time between anything actually really happening. Whereas in hockey, it's so fast paced. So there's challenges to both of them. And it's truly an amazing skill. And, and I think that's an important thing that you just said. You don't know if it was his voice or not. In what I do as a female and being the female voice amongst this sea of men, I sound different than everyone and I have a much higher register than what everybody is used to hearing. So I take a lot of criticism for my voice and it gets to you at some point because you want to keep your voice in a box. So it makes you refrain from getting really excited in the big moments because, you hear people say, oh, well, she's screechy or her, and it's really like, I've heard a lot of men freak out, like on goal calls and they're pretty up there too. But it's just because my female voice sounds so different. And I totally accept that though, because you can't normalize it unless I speak the way I speak and we hear a female voice more and more. But more importantly than that, I have certain people that I like to listen to more than other play-by-plays. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I have no problem with someone saying, you're fine, but I don't enjoy listening to you. Got you. Because there's people I don't really like listening to. So I never take that as a huge criticism, but boy, do I wish I had the silky pipes of, Dan or someone like that. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of play-by-plays who like the sound of their own voice. Yeah, it really is a hard thing to listen to yourself call. It's a lot. It's a lot. So yeah.
So you've been in the game of hockey for quite a while now.
Yeah.
So what are some of the most memorable moments that kind of come to mind that you've or stories that you've covered?
There's memorable moments and then there's fun moments. And they're a little different from each other. So a memorable moment, I already mentioned when the Jets came back. I remember it was just so big because, like so many of us, I was here when they left. And I wouldn't say I was a staunch Jets fan because Ron was playing. So I was a Philly fan.
Have to.
But, I still understood what it meant and how important it was to our province. And I always say our province because it's not the Winnipeg Jets. It's our province. And so, I remember the day before when the Nationals were starting to fly in and I was doing a story and I was on Portage and Maine doing a live hit for CTV with the cover of the paper saying, is this going to happen? And we'd been through it so much, right, in Winnipeg with, the Coyotes and will they, won't they, to the point where I remember doing a sit down with Mark Chipman years later. And he talked about the fact that they had the chairs up on the floor a few years before ready for the announcement about the Coyotes coming. That's how close it was. That's how close, right? So here it was. And I thought, is this just like another, just bringing us along and it's not really going to happen? And I will never forget 6 a.m. the next day, my BlackBerry, because it was BlackBerry days, went off and I had it high up in case I got a text that I had to come in early or something because I was told if this happens tomorrow, you're on at Hextall. So I was like, got you. And I had my outfit picked out already just in case and everything else. And all of a sudden, 6 a.m., my BlackBerry went off. And there it was from Scott Brown, the PR guy of what had been the Manitoba Moose and now True North, saying that there's a major announcement. And I shot out of bed and said, holy shit, we're getting an NHL team. And I bolted to the shower, got ready, and was in. And it was, just sitting in that room when the commissioner came in along with Mr. Thompson and Mark Chipman and just how much work you knew went into this and how much it was going to mean and what the celebration was going to be and just how much it meant. It was hard not to cry, in the room when I was like, watching this unfold because it meant so much. And the national media got it, but they didn't get it. Mm-hmm. We got it, kind of thing, us local people. And I also knew what this was going to do for my career. I was going to get to cover an NHL team now after covering the AHL for 7 years almost, right? So it was a big step for me as well. So that was a huge moment. I think, one of the funnest things I've ever done is cover the Memorial Cup in Brandon back in 2010, I believe it was. So that was just a good time, to go back and cover such a big event in my hometown. It meant the world. And the Wheaties went to the final. So that was a big one. But it's hard because I've covered a World Series. And I've covered, AFC championships in Boston and I've covered Stanley Cups and I haven't done a Stanley Cup live event though yet. So that's fingers crossed with ESPN kind of putting that into fruition. Maybe I can report on that.
On the list.
We have the cup this year. Who knows? Yeah. But, those are kind of, the things that kind of stick out. A lot of them have come from my time here in Manitoba. They're not necessarily the major events I've covered elsewhere, but, there's also the sad ones. I was in Boston when the marathon bombing happened. I had to report on it that night on Nesson.
Wow.
And it was horrific. I remember being in my apartment in Boston and suddenly my phone wasn't working. And I was getting ready to go to work because the marathon had been on that day. And I had to go in early because we had coverage. And I was like, why isn't my phone working? And then, turn on the TV just to watch a sports channel and there was the news. And I was like, can I leave? Can I get out of Boston? Because they shut that down. And the phones weren't working because they shut them down that quickly in case it was being designated by phones, the bombs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we didn't have phone service. My family couldn't get a hold of me. They knew I had told them I'm covering the bomb, not the bombings, the marathon that day, but I was covering it from the studio. So I wasn't on site. But as a Canadian down there, this was something that I had only been down there for a few months. And it really opened my eyes to a different type of world that, we don't experience necessarily here at home as much. Mm-hmm. There was, the Sandy Hook shooting when I was down there. There was just a lot of things that kind of showed me that, I'm in a different place. And as amazing as Boston is, it just was a different culture. And, so those are big moments too that they're sport related, but they're not, but it flows into sport kind of thing. But, those are kind of the things that stand out. I mean, I have a World Series ring from the Red Sox winning the World Series because Nesson was kind enough to get us fitted for them and them made. We don't quite have as much bling as the players, but it's got my name on it and everything. It's a pretty cool keepsake. But I don't think the memories compare to the people that you meet and all the stories you get to tell. And, over, the fact that I still have people, I have kids who come up to me and say, hey, I was your sports star of the week, or do you remember me when you interviewed me this time? And I think that's great that they even remember who I am. So that kind of makes everything worthwhile in the end on some of the days where you're like, why do I do this?
Had a few of those days. So you had mentioned earlier about knowing the game and, the data and the stats that come with it. Yeah. So from the time that you started versus now, how has not only technology changed, but our ability to track stats and data?
Yeah. Well, it hit a new level this year. The NHL just put out NHL Edge, which is player tracking information, which they've and teams have had access to for many years. But now the public's getting a taste of it. So that is a new thing. It's, seeing how quick a guy skates in a shift to how his shot is to, all the little tidbits that, we don't usually get to see. So some of that data has been available to us as broadcasters because of, the people that our networks hire to use. And we can, that's why we sound smart. And usually it's our stats guy making us sound or gal sound very smart because they're giving us the little nuggets like this is his first goal since blah, 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 or first hat trick.
That's
or,
right, yeah.
This is how hard that shot was, or this is how long this player's been on the ice for. That all comes from our statistician because we don't have time to figure it out as we're calling. So that data is now available more readily to the public. What it does is it makes our job easier and harder at the same time. Analytics are a very difficult thing to understand for someone like me who is, and I think for a lot of people, goals above expected average, all those type of things. It's like, well, what does that even mean? And how do you take something like that and explain it on television in this much time? You can't. So you really have to figure out what information, and this is the part of my job that I take pride in, is putting things into context, figuring out what data helps me tell the story. And this really plays in when I'm reporting. If I'm doing Ovi's chase to pass Gretzky and I'm trying to get data on when he can do it, how he can do it, what's actually the time frame, how many goals does he have to get years, that puts it into context for the audience exactly how close he actually is. If he only scores 25 goals for the next 3 years of his contract, we're looking at a new, kind of thing. So I always look at how can I, explain this player, because we always hear, oh, he's playing so much better. Well, why? Why is he playing so much better? So I try to answer those questions all the time. So the technology is very helpful in finding really unique things. Like we can see now, like Chris Kreider, he has got the most tip-ins in the league, 2 years ago, right? But that doesn't really mean anything unless those tip-ins are going in. So seeing that, when he stands on the power play and he tips it in and 50% of those tip-ins are going in, that puts it into context. Wow, like this is his shot. This is his spot. This is why he has this many power play goals leading the league. So that's kind of the challenge with the data, is that it's so readily available now. And there's so many things that you can deep dive into, but really, how do you explain it to not just the greatest hockey fan, but also the fan that we're trying to intrigue? Because we never want to stop people from watching the game. And when you get too into the weeds, I personally feel it's too much. There are places that if you have interest in doing those deep dives, you can go. There's so many incredible, websites and people who understand this way more than I do. And now we're adding gambling into it, which is like a whole nother level that I go, nope. My little brain can't handle this. So that's the biggest challenge right now, is the information's out there, but trying to figure out how do you place it into the game to make things still interesting and also educate and entertain your audience.
Yeah. Context is a great word.
It's you have to, right? And that's one thing that I struggle with sometimes with, and I don't want to use the word struggle, but it's always a conversation with me with my producers when, our graphics department will have all these great stats and they'll put them on graphic boards. I'm like, but what does that mean? Why is that important to me? Because if it's not, then why are we showing it? Like, just don't throw it up to throw it up. We're telling stories here. We're trying to have storylines. So that's something at ESPN. And remember, we're only in year 3. They hadn't had it for years. I think 2004 was prior. So there's a lot of people who are coming from baseball, football, and are incredible at what they do, but they're learning the game right now. So there's been a really big learning curve over the last 2 years. And really, I'm so proud of so many people and how quickly they have jumped on board of the game and are, but it's always a conversation with why is that important to the audience? Yeah.
Touching on the presentation I got to watch you give. It was
about not one of the boys. It's my keynote. Yes.
Yeah. And absolutely, I mean, you knocked it out of the park. For anyone that hasn't seen it, very powerful. Very insightful. We'll put it in the show notes. And what I didn't want to do was have you just redo your keynote presentation here. But in such a male-dominated sport, right? You're the first of many, right? You're the first person to come in and do what you've done. So what advice would you give to aspiring female whether it's sports journalists or people that want to get into key positions that no female has ever been to before?
I think to understand that the world that you're stepping into may not be ready for you.
Yeah.
And that is what I have learned. When you are the first to do something, you realize very quickly how lonely of a place that is because there is no one that has shared that similar experience to you. And when you don't have someone that you can ask for their playbook and you're creating it on your own and having to find ways to deal with whether the negatives or the positives of it, it's not an easy place to be. It's very tough mentally. So you have to, first of all, really want it and love it
Mm-hmm.
and have a passion for it. Because if you don't, it will crush you. And there are, after my first season, I really sat down with myself and my mom asked me, "Hey, kid, season's wrapped. How was it?" And the words that popped out of my mouth were, "I survived." And it shocked me that I said that to her. But that is truly how I felt. Like, this is my mother who I'm speaking to, where there's, no need to window dress things. And that's how I felt. I thought I managed to survive. The question was, do I want to do this? Because no one seems to want me to do this. Or that's how it felt. Even though there are so many supportive people, the negativity was so overwhelming in my brain and what I was taking in that it so affected my confidence. And that's where I reached out to get a mental skills coach in my second year. And I understand I have a much deeper understanding why athletes and CEOs and very high up professionals seek out mental skills coach, because I honestly wasn't strong enough to go into the second season on my own. And I identified that. I knew I would not survive it if I didn't make some changes and give myself the tools. So, I went into that and it was there's so many great lessons I've learned from that I'll say, but just to get back to your question about advice is, it just truly is that. Just be prepared for those who you thought had you dropping you. Those who, when you were a reporter and a host, which so many females are, were very supportive of you and told you were great. And, like people in the business, my colleagues and coaches and whatnot. And suddenly when you're in a space that they don't necessarily think you deserve or are good enough for, although how could you be? Because how do you become a qualified candidate when you can't gain experience because of a lack of opportunity? And that's what that is. Every man has seen themselves represented as head coaches, players, GMs, executives in the NHL, because that's all there has been up until a certain point. They understand that opportunity exists. And there's, from the grassroots level up of being your kids coach all the way to the NHL, you have the opportunity to learn and gain experience to become a qualified candidate. I did not have that in play-by-play. There were no women doing it. That's why first has become something that when you read my bio is a common theme, because I had to create my own opportunities and push through. And it's the one thing I'll give myself credit for is that. But, when you have people suddenly who you trusted and thought respected you, and suddenly you're hearing, and not just hearing it from other people, you're hearing it directly, or they're going out publicly and saying it on podcasts and interviews and speaking about you when they have your phone number. And if they really felt this way, why don't you send me a text or give me a call? Why can't you talk to me like a person and respect me enough? Because I feel you wouldn't do that to a male colleague. And you really get this lesson, and it's not feminism. It's not anything to do with that. It's just simply that this was not a space that was, or right now is, ready for me. So if you want to come behind, even though I've opened the door, and trust me, I've only opened the door this much. I have not pushed all the way through. People think I have because I'm there. Trust me, it is not there. It's not close to being there in our hockey world, or just I feel in the world in general for women. And so, it's only opened a bit. So if you're going to come behind me, you have to understand I've made it available. That's great. I'm representing. You see yourself, you hear someone who sounds like you. That's great. But this is no cakewalk. And it is a struggle every single day I deal with some sort of comment or getting a Google alert or somebody telling me, oh, have you heard this or seen this? So, that's why year 2, I had to get the mental skills coach, because it was like, I'm not going to survive this. And I want to survive it because I know progress is being made in my call.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to do with representing women or anything else. I know I'm getting better.
Yeah.
So I want to keep getting better because this is something that matters to me. So it's not going to be easy for the next. And honestly, I've had people say that, the experiment of me has, ruined it for every other woman coming behind me. And I don't necessarily think that's true at all. But I do think that if we don't find a way in the media world to give more opportunities to women much earlier on in play-by-play, then they're never going to be as good as their male counterparts, because their male counterparts are calling at the junior level, the AHL level, and then, ECHL level, all those different levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have all these opportunities. And I never saw a woman doing that. So I didn't even think it was possible until I decided, hey, I'm going to try it. Yeah. So it's hard.
You mentioned taking some advice and going to do it on your own kind of thing, right? Yeah. And what I really love about what you said is it's really it goes across every skill, every industry, every career. Is you're gonna suck when you start.
Yep.
That's just it. You suck, and then you suck a little less, and then you suck a little less at doing what you're doing, right? And so
be brave enough to suck at something new.
That's right. Yeah. And going out and cutting your teeth on your own time, doing it, looking like the crazy lady in the stands.
Yeah.
Calling play-by-play, and even, listening to your own game tapes and continually improving is incredible. Now, stuff that came to my mind too, though, while watching your presentation was about being qualified. Okay. And I don't know, I want to go a little deeper into it. So you said that you weren't the most qualified.
Absolutely.
Right. And the thing is, like, you also don't think that the most qualified, or whether they should or shouldn't get the job. Like, my mind was just running. So really, the best candidate that gets the job, it's not, like, to me, when I'm looking at potential candidates to hire, it's not necessarily the person with the most experience. Mm-hmm. It's not who's been in it the longest, but it's also so many other things. It's character, it's life experiences, it's the dynamics that they add to the environment and everything like that. So I would challenge you a little bit, saying that, I don't necessarily agree that it's the experience in the play-by-play that did it. But if you're being hired and it's not a colossal fuck up a few months later, and then they're like, oh, we shouldn't have hired Leah, they did hire the right candidate. And I would say that you were the right person for that at the time. Now, I totally get what you're saying about the least amount of experience coming in. But I think that really, when you were talking about giving opportunities to people coming in, is I absolutely agree. And I absolutely agree as well that there's so many other factors that come into play in hiring, females in a male-dominated industry, let's say.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to get through, is that ESPN hired me with intent. Mm-hmm. They understood, yes, they could have had their pick of the litter. They could have had any NHL caliber play-by-play. I was not an NHL caliber play-by-play. I had done one NHL game. So when we talk about experience, that's what I mean about, if we continue to hire the most qualified candidate for the job at that level, we're never going to see, whether it's female, peoples of color, whatnot in hockey break through, because how do you get it when you can't even get to that level, mm-hmm. to the NHL, right? So that's been a problem, within just our sport, speaking from my lane of hockey. Right. But with ESPN, they hired me with intent because they looked at, to your point, Dan, they looked at the years I've spent covering, the game and my knowledge of the game, which was 20 years. They looked at my experience as a broadcaster, which I have a great resume behind me. And, they saw what I was trying to do in the play-by-play. I'd done the NCAA for them. I called the longest game in NCAA history going into 5 overtimes. There's 3 of us in that club who've called 5 OTs. So, I mean, if I can do that, then, hey, maybe she can stand in and do this long term. And then they looked at my potential. They saw, okay, she's not the most polished, but so all I needed was that opportunity. And they also looked at the scope of the fact that there'd never been a woman doing it and thought, if they don't do it, who's going to? And ESPN has the ability to because they're ESPN, right? Yep. They have that credibility behind them. So, and then it was up to me to do the work, to make sure that it wasn't a fuck up. And, that doesn't mean that I didn't make or continue to make mistakes, because as I say, there's 3 things that happen every time I step into the booth. I make a mistake, which I will learn from, which makes me better. That happens every game I do. So knowing that, it's very helpful to know that we are all moving forward. We are all developing. And yes, it's a slow burn. But as long as there's progress in it, which there has been, then it's not a mistake. And they didn't make a bad hire. That does not mean, though, that as a company, they don't feel the heat. And therefore, I call less games last year than I did the first year. Or maybe this year I'm not calling as much and I'm reporting more. Like that does come into play. And it's one of those things, again, where I go back to the world not being ready for me in this realm. And that's okay. But I think that you're absolutely correct. And there needs to be things outside the scope. When, it's one of the things I speak about is, there are people in positions of power, if you are hiring like yourself in your business, that can look around the room and say, who's not being represented and why? And then perhaps having to seek out those candidates that do have experience, and potential, they just need that opportunity. Maybe on paper, looking past the credentials on paper and saying, okay, but they bring these other intangibles. But the word seek out needs to happen as well, because I was scared to even tell someone that I wanted to try to do play-by-play.
Right.
I was terrified of it because it was play-by-play and no female had done it. And who am I to think I can even do this skill? And finally I did, because I knew that once you let the genie out of the bottle, if I didn't take it all away, I was going to be back on the floor failing like I had felt I had done previously when I couldn't even get a job in the industry after Sportsnet. So it was just one of those things where, when you look at the hiring process, it goes across any job. I think even beyond just even male-dominated fields, but just looking around the room and saying who's not represented and why. But when it comes to women in the sport of hockey, how can you win if you're ignoring 51% of the population not being represented within your league? And that is the case what was going on. And we're just starting to see it trickle in, and I hope it continues. But I think we're in for a battle.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's also a portion of how many Leah Hextalls are there, right? How many females are as passionate and as driven and as into hockey and, willing to fight their way through it, that won't stop at the first, sexist comment or social media hammering, right?
Yeah.
Which you have taken and just
I've done my time trending for not the right reasons. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, strengthening the mind and mind work and stuff like that. So take me through that. Like what kind are we talking, meditation, visualization?
I wish I was that girl. Yeah. I wish. I've tried so hard because everybody, the meditation, I have tried. I'm not built that way. I can't do it. And I don't want to do it. So that's one thing. But I think the big thing for me is the same place I gave my keynote the first time was at a coaches conference at the University of Michigan. And at that time, there was a gentleman named Dr. Cassie Preston who was speaking. And he actually spoke before I did. And I was sitting there preparing and I heard him say, confidence is a variable. And it immediately piqued my attention. And this was after I was done my first season. I went, what do you mean confidence is a variable? And he went in to explain it. And what he says is, I can finish calling a game And I can look back at that game and feel really good about it as soon as I'm done. That was good. We did well, you know. My producer can tell me, yeah, great game. My analyst can tell me, yeah, we had a great game. I open up my phone and I see 1, 2 negative comments, and that feeling is gone. Suddenly, I'm thinking about, oh, well, maybe they're right. You know, maybe I didn't have a good game. And you start to, and it's just the confidence that you had just had about that you had been successful in that outing, it goes away, which is why he says it's a variable. It's not real because it can be taken away from you so easily.
Right.
So instead, he speaks about owning your capabilities. So one of the key adjustments for me is that I have a list of all the things that make a good play-by-play. So cadence, tone, you know, knowledge, storytelling, all these things that I believe go into it. And I compare that to someone who I believe is a gold standard in my industry. And if they're 100%, then I look at all those characteristics that I need to be like them as a play-by-play and that status. And so after a game, instead of feeling like I had a good game, I go and look at this list. And out of a percentage out of 100, I'll be like, okay, storytelling, 99. I hit that. You know, information, entertainment, I'm all in the 90s. Ooh, goal call, cadence, all those type of things. Maybe I'm down at 80. And then at the end, you figure out, okay, I ended up that game 87 out of 100.
It's pretty good.
It's great.
Yeah.
But if I open up my phone and see a negative comment, that all goes away.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, I'm owning those capabilities and being like, that is what I did today. And then looking at the ones that weren't as good and going, why didn't I do better? Was it lack of sleep, lack of preparation? Did I not eat properly that day? All of these things that go into the way we perform.
Mm-hmm.
And, did my routine prior to the game get interrupted, which happens a lot? Was I not able to adapt to a situation using my reset routine, which is sip of water, breath, and tapping my grandfather's Hall of Fame ring. Every time I need to reset, that's what I do in the booth, and it gets me there. So those are the type of things that I've been working on with Dr. Preston is just, being able to own my capabilities. I don't use the word confidence anymore. Mm-hmm. I just don't. And, because I do believe it, I know that my confidence, I can feel very confident in my performance. And then I see a negative comment and it washes away. And I don't think I'm the only person that happens to. And then the other part of it is just, getting completely filtered up on the social media and really understanding that social media is not a real world. Unfortunately, a lot of the decision makers in my industry and the broadcast industry do pay attention to it. I understand they have to. But it really doesn't mean anything. It's the people who are in the arena, the people who get it, who understand what you're doing and really learning to listen to them. So those are probably the biggest adjustments I've made in my mindset and my work with Dr. Preston, who does have a book coming out. I want to plug that for him because I'll be plugging it on
another shout.
I know.
I like it.
He's great. And he works with a lot of hockey players and executives and whatnot. And I feel very fortunate that, I just happened to encounter him at the same conference because that confidence is a variable really changed how I go about doing my business and getting through and surviving a lot of what I take in, which is the negative part of my job. And last season, I felt a whole heck of a lot better at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds very familiar when I had, I'll say the awareness come or an awakening or, something where you actually feel more intentional and start understanding yourself a little more. And what it sounds like is you stop listening to feelings and looking more into facts and using those facts to create your own story, right? And that's very interesting because when you mentioned, being able to get into the zone and like I'm ready, is that. The power of the mind is incredible. And I think that's what separates a lot of amateurs from professionals, whether it's, sports or any careers for that matter, which being aware of yourself and your own mind is probably one of the biggest strengths or the biggest investments that, at least personally, I found has been the biggest catalysts for not only just happiness, but also kind of the results.
Yeah. And it's so true because, another thing that Dr. Preston says is do the hard things first. So just even in my prep process, I used to, my first year I would get up and I do a lot of reading of articles and, watching highlights from the night before and whatnot. And then by the time I was done that and getting into like the work that really matters, because he'd be like, well, what's the most important thing? I'm like, names and numbers. He's like, then why aren't you doing those very first? Do the hard things first. And because, I'm like, oh, so now like even when I go and exercise, I'll do the hard things first. I do, well, it's harder on my left side because, than it is on my right side. So when I'm lifting, I'll, do that side first of my body when I'm doing individual exercises. It's amazing how it's overflown into my mentality. Like even when I'm cleaning my house yesterday, I'm like, what's the one, or even, something that I don't like doing the most. Okay. The bathrooms are the hardest thing. Let's get them done. Like, so it's amazing how it just kind of has, overflowed into so many facets of my life and the way I look at things. And, the other part too is, for me, I think the biggest change in my life is I lost my dad in 2019, rather suddenly. And, he was such, as I mentioned here, he was my first teacher and he was just my dad, and he didn't get to see this. He didn't get to see me call an NHL game. He wasn't, he passed before I got to do that. And it's just one of those things where, you realize very quickly how important time is and that it's not guaranteed. So instead of, harping on things and like really, because I was one of those people who, when a mistake was made, and I still do it, but like I try to be better, I'll make a mistake in a game and I'm still thinking about it 3 years later. I'll still remember, oh, you know what? I did this one and it'll still upset me. So, when you figure out that time is not guaranteed and it's so limited and you need to live, in the moment, I think that has also really helped my mindset. Just, don't harp on things, just move past it and keep going and push through. And so that's something that I think has made me stronger to be able to deal with some of the, effects of my job and pushing through them, is because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what too many people think of me. It's what, I think of myself, along with that very, very small circle, which has become even smaller since I lost my dad. Am I making those people proud? Am I fulfilling goals for myself? And, we're such a result focused society. And when I talk about goals, I really try to focus on, the process to getting there. And even though you might not get the result that you wanted, you still hit the goal because you got there in some form or another. So there's a lot of things that since I lost my dad, it just, you realize how much, for me, I live in my head and how important it is, as you said, to be aware of who you are. And it took me until my 40s to really understand who I am. And it just so happened my dad died when I was 40. So, it's one of those things where you start to understand that you got to have some clarity of what works for you and what doesn't. And you will be so much more successful, not only in your professional, but your personal life, once you get the ability to hone that in.
So piggybacking off of that, is there anything that you wish people knew either about you or your career that they don't, or there are common misconceptions?
That's, it's a bit of a tough one because what I do is so public, obviously, but I'm an extremely private person. And anything that people think they know about me, trust me, you don't know. You know what I want you to know, because there's so much of my life that nobody knows about. And I do that specific because it means something to me. And because, like I just said, I have a very small circle. And I just, I used to be a lot more, I think, open than I am now with that part of my life before I started working at ESPN and whatnot. I don't really, I don't really, if you think what you want, really. I mean, it really, at the end of the day, doesn't matter what you think about me. I hope that people, it's funny because I get emails sometimes saying, I don't like listening to you, but I know that you really know the game. And I take that as a compliment. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. I got this one email from this guy this year saying, you still suck, but you don't suck as much. But I was like, that's progress.
Yeah.
Like to me,
that's the
I'm
definition of progress.
and I think maybe that's part of it is like, I really don't take myself too seriously. I take what I do seriously. I take pride in what I do. I always want to make sure that I'm prepared. I'm probably an over preparer. People in the industry know that about me. I have a very high standard of where I hold myself and where I want to be, but it's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. So, I don't know what people think about me. That's probably a good, I know some things that people think about me, unfortunately, but really it's just, I'm not saving lives. So I really don't take myself as serious as people might think it is. I am talking about hockey. I am not saving lives. And, when I worked in politics, there was actual real things being done that we were achieving and honest, being in politics through the pandemic. I mean, that was real world. That's important stuff. This is playtime. And as much as I take great pride in it and I take it seriously, but at the end of the day, I have a kid's job, a luxury job, and I'm aware of that. So I guess when, people, like if they knew me, they probably know, like, I don't live like, oh, I'm Leah Hextall, the sports broadcaster, and I'm the first to do this. There's none of that. My friends would be the first to say, like, can you not take some sort of moment to recognize what you've done? And I'm like, no, because what did I do? I'm talking hockey. So, maybe that's it. Just that it's really not that big of a deal.
I think you're being a little modest there, but yeah, I do understand. And I love what you said about just, I don't really care what people think about me.
As long as my mom and my sister like me, that's the two people
There
in
you
my
go.
life.
Yeah.
Like though, honestly,
Well, as we age and we get smarter,
hopefully,
most
we hope
people,
to,
hopefully, as we get a little more wisdom, we realize that, our bubbles shrink and what we care about,
Yes.
changes and our perspectives change and everything like that. So, two-part question.
Yes.
What was the hardest part about your job when you started versus what's the hardest part now?
So when I first started, oh my goodness, when I first started, it was simply just talking.
Getting
and I talk
things
a
out of my
lot,
mouth, yeah.
as you can tell.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think, when I first started in Brandon, I remember it didn't feel hard. I think probably the one point was just so much of the unknown. Because everything felt like the first day of school for so long because you weren't certain, like, this is the first time I've ever done this, so you have the fear of that and just the anticipation of, well, you're meeting all these people and interviewing people for the first time and what kind of questions should I ask? And it's just, the first time being at this location. My very first assignment, we had to go up to Wayway-Sakapo for an MJHL game and my shooter and I got lost and we didn't get there till the third period. And the guy we were doing a story on had been hurt and already left the ice. So I came back with like nothing. And I was like, I am going to get fired tomorrow, as I was eating my McDonald's from Neepwa because that was the closest place to stop. And we were so hungry on the way home. And I was like, I'm going to get fired. And I totally thought I was going to get fired. I walked in that next morning and I had left a note telling, my boss what had happened. It's a 2-person sports department. And I'll never forget. And I walked in and Ken Playtink, bless his heart, was like, kid, it's okay. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Blah, blah. So basically I came back with a glorified highlight reel of one period with like trying to figure out what do we do with this? So there was the fear of the unknown probably. That was probably the hardest thing at the beginning, just not knowing what I was doing, not having a hot clue, as they say. The hard part now is living up to my own expectations because I am very demanding of myself. And now that I have become a first, I feel like I am representing 51% of the population, which is something you cannot take on. But if you're the first and you fail, what does that say? And it's even something that this season I had to battle with because with ESPN, well, play-by-play is, I just signed a new deal this summer and play-by-play is still in my contract and it's there. But they were very honest with me that, with our game schedule and your reporting abilities, we need you to report more this year than call. And, I was happy they were honest with me, but I was like, yeah, but I need a certain amount of games to get better. And, if I'm only calling a handful of games this year, does that look like I'm not doing anymore? Did I fail? All these things start running through your head. And it's like, what if it goes away? What if suddenly I'm not doing it anymore? What if, and all these things went through my head this summer, and it was a real something I had to walk through, because there was a part of me that thought, if you were doing as good as you thought you were, you wouldn't be getting your games pulled back a bit. But that's really not what was happening. It was that you are a really good reporter, and that's what the team needs. As we've all played on teams before, what's your role? You might want to be the first line centerman, but you're not. You're the first line winger. And if you're not playing that position, then you're the fourth line, and you have to figure out what's best for the team. But in my mind, it was like, I don't want people to think that I've let them down, because I'm not representing as much on air in this role, which I was the first to do. And that is something that I think is the hard part, is I don't want to let women down. And as I just said, I'm not saving lives. So this really isn't, it's not needed for the world to carry on, but it is an important thing for little girls. Like when I get notes from dads that send me pictures of their little girls pointing and saying it's a girl. When I have 75-year-old colonels from the Army sending me notes, it's the first time I've ever seen a woman, and I really enjoyed it. And just being able to make an impact in my small little way, I don't want to lose that. And with my standard now set for this is who you are a play-by-play now. I can't lose that as part of my identity. So it's one of those things which I think is very difficult for me, because I want to make sure that I continue the standard that I've set, the standard that I've set for other women, so that they can see themselves and come up behind me and be successful in that. So that's probably the hardest part right now. So it feels like a little bit of pressure sometimes, but it is self-inflicted pressure. And I'm aware of that, but there is also a very large community that would like to see me disappear. So there's a big, big part of me that's like, fuck off. I'm here.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. So how do you say, there is a lot of heaviness, and there is a lot of work that you have to put in.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you stay so passionate about hockey? How do you stay so passionate about even play-by-play or reporting? Like what is it about it?
I think because when the little red light turns on, I absolutely love what I do. I love to perform, and I love that we have no idea what's going to happen next. You do all this preparation because you don't know, because the game's the star. It's going to dictate what's going on. So, here we go. I love, I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but I think a big part of it is I've always loved to perform since I was young. I've done, besides playing sports, the other side of me, which made me become a broadcaster, was, yes, I played sports, loved them, loved everything about them. And then I also did a lot of drama and plays and public speaking competitions. Like, who's the kid who's entering Festival of Arts public speaking competitions? This girl. Most people hate the idea of public speaking. I loved it. So I married those two together. So it's just that performance really is, getting to be there. The other part is the people you get to meet. I mean, I'm aware of how spoiled I am. I mean, if you go to my social media, there's a video of Alexander Ovechkin helping me off the bench and popping me into the, lifting me up and putting me between the boards, and I'm sitting there going, this is the greatest goal scorer of all time, who's waiting for me with his hand out to help escort me back to my spot. I get to meet some pretty amazing athletes. And people and coaches, and learn from them, and just, have a lot of laughs. And what we do is, like I said, it's kind of like working in a candy shop. It's tough, but it's such a luxury position to be in my life. And I can't believe that the kid who started at CKX now works for ESPN. That was, and I never thought I'd be the first to do anything. But I think, a big part of it, besides that, of the love of what I do, is how I was raised. I have a sister who's extremely successful as well. So I think it does have a lot to do with how we were raised. We also have a very healthy dose of sibling rivalry, and we're also each other's biggest cheerleaders. But I had parents who always said, do something you love, do something you would do for free. And this is how I came about it. And I really feel that I fulfilled that. I am a very competitive person. So the drive is natural. It's something that I wish some days I wasn't. I wish I wasn't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I spend, I'm not, I haven't called yet this season. So, I have to stay prepared. So this morning I've got a game up and I'm calling it. I'm just calling it off a screen, like going back to how I started. Because I'm like, I got to be ready. I got to be ready for when the next opportunity comes. So I already don't have the skill to the level I want it to be. So I got to really get on it. So it's just finding those things. And those things actually come pretty natural to me. So I just think it's kind of the way I was born and how grew up. And I come from a very competitive family. Like the Hextalls are very competitive people. And then there's my mom's side that is, the intellect and the grace part, which I'm still trying to learn. But, I think that's where that drive comes from. So you marry those two together, just loving what you do and then just the person that you kind of were. And that's it. And selfishly, there's a legacy part to it.
If only more of the world could find and work for something that they love to do, like
yes.
That's incredible.
I don't have a job. Like that was the one thing that I've always said to people. It doesn't feel like a job. It's my career. But I also am aware from the time I took away and when I was working in government and politics that I have transferable skills and I really liked it. And it sparked a passion in me in a different way. So to know too, to have that power of if this doesn't fulfill me at some point, which it probably won't at some point, there are other things in this world that I know I can be good at and that I know I can have passion for. And that gives you almost a little bit of sense of power.
Is that something you want to go back to?
I think so.
In politics?
I think so.
And you were mainly conservative?
I worked for the conservative government. I worked for Premier Pallister. That's who he hired me. I knew nothing about politics when I walked through the door. I created the job. Okay. And then I went on to manage a department and be very involved.
What job did you create?
When I went in, his social media, you couldn't see him. And on the nightly news, he wasn't there, but they had a majority government. And so I just knew him. So I reached out and just said, where are you? Where's your government? You got a majority. What's going on? And he brought me in to meet with his chief of staff, Phil Hood, at the time. And originally it was just to come in and start doing his social media for him, creating videos, doing all that, which I didn't know tons about, but I'm a broadcaster, I'm a messenger. I know how to message to people. So that was my job at the beginning. And I knew nothing. I was always asking why are we doing this? So everybody hated me when I first walked through the door because here's this broadcaster girl who knows nothing. And they knew I knew nothing, but I was also asking questions and pushing them to say to me, why are we doing this? And that, eventually it all worked out and I met so many great people and it worked out well. But very quickly, I became a manager of a department we created, which handled all of his social media, all of his events, the look of them, the speakers, how we messaged our, announcement. That was what my department did. And I loved it. And I was in the campaign, right in the group that helped, run when we ran and won another majority. And it was the hardest I've ever worked in my life. And it feeds you in the way media kind of does because everything's a tire fire every day. It does not stop. You cannot win in politics because if you're making one person happy, you're upsetting another. And people need to understand that being a politician, I get you don't like some of them, but we need to not speak badly about them because we need mayors in small towns. And even in Brandon, they didn't even have, Mayor Fawcett. I'm happy he's there. He's great, but nobody ran against him. We need to have public servants. They spend their weekends at hot dog eating contests. That's what they do. It's not this glamorous thing that people think it is. I know there's some bad ones, but there's a lot of great ones too that are trying to evoke change. So I look at that and I look at some of the things we got to do, the money we gave to certain programs in Manitoba. I go to Brandon, I see Daily Bridge being done. I was part of that announcement. My team handled it. And it's a big deal in Brandon to get that bridge doubled, little things that, mean something to our province and trying to push our province forward because we've accepted this have-not mentality. And we have so many resources. We have such a beautiful province. We have so much potential that we're not tapping into that I really feel, that if we got the right people in the room, we could be a player in this country. So, as you can see me talking about it, I do enjoy it. I enjoy the idea of getting things done for the people of Manitoba. I don't think it would mean as much to me if it wasn't in Manitoba because I want to represent us because I am a Manitoban and I'm very proud of it. Very proud of it. So I could see myself at the right time, maybe going back into it.
I don't think they'd like you at the federal level asking, why are we doing
No,
this?
sometimes I don't think they liked it at the provincial level
Okay,
sometimes either. I got into a few tete-a-tetes, but I'll give Brian Pallister one thing. Him and I used to sometimes get into it, but he would listen to people. He would listen to me, and sometimes I would even win.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
Well, you know what? Sometimes logic and facts and,
And there were times I was dead wrong too. And you learn that. You learn that quickly when you're like, okay, yeah, I was not right. You were right there and I was wrong. So
but that's a big ability for somebody to actually acknowledge that and just say, okay, like changing your mind because somebody has shown different data or different facts.
I love it when people change my mind. Yeah. When I used to run my department, one of the things I would say is when somebody would come with an idea or say, well, we have to do it this way. I say, well, I think we should do it this way. So change my mind. Mm-hmm. It, pitch to me, basically, explain to me why. And sometimes and then it usually would come to a compromise in the middle of a little bit of this and a little bit of that because, both people would see a different side of the story.
Well, every time we hire somebody new and they come in and if they're very bright and they're confident and stuff like that, they start questioning stuff.
Yes.
And I love it. If it catches me on the wrong day, probably not that great. But what it does is it forces me to reiterate, okay, what is the process? Why are we doing it? Does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, is there something better?
Yeah. The question why, if you think about littles, right? What do they always say? Why? Why? Why is the sky blue? Why? Why? They say that all the time. I ask that question when I'm reporting more than anything else. Why? How? It's so simple, but it's usually the best way to unlock different ways of thinking or to get the best information out of someone. So that's why I simply will just say why. And I don't put any other words in front or behind it, just simple one word, because it makes somebody stop and go, well, because that's not an answer. Why? And people will start to think. And so,
hopefully they
what's the why is like, if you're in business or anywhere you are, just drop that in a meeting and watch people kind of go, well, cause. And everybody goes, well, that's not a good answer. And it makes people start to think.
Are you a routine person? Are you a daily routine? Are you not?
Interesting. I am when I am working. When I am on the road, I have a very strict routine. My game routine, my day of game routine, I'm very like a player. It's, I take these flights, I get to my destination, I unpack immediately, I wash my hands, I unpack immediately. And people think, well, you're only there for like 48 hours. Why are you unpacking everything? I like to see everything. I like to see everything hung up. I want everything in its place. I want to be able to grab it quickly. So I unpack and then I do some work. I eat, I come back. I usually have a glass of wine. I go to bed. Next morning, it's, you get up, game notes, workout, morning skates, eat, take in what you learned from morning skate, get the things finished up, do a little bit more work, nap, wake up, shower, get ready, go to the game. And then at the game, my people always have orange juice ready for me and coffee because those are the two things I need. And I really own my process there. Like, this is how I get ready for a game. In my makeup chair, don't bug me when I'm in makeup. This is my time to do this. I don't want anybody talking to me. So yes. So my game routine is very, very structured. At home, not so much. Not so much. I mean, I'm a big list person. I love writing down, okay, today I'm going to, and it doesn't mean I'm going to get everything done, but I love crossing things off. So I'll put like the simplest thing on a list. Like
I'm going to walk over to the kitchen. Done.
Yes. And I will stretch things out to be like where you could put one category and I'll put like 3 things. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm not really, I don't think I'm a huge routine person, but the one part of my routine that I know needs to be there is my alone time. Yeah. And my decompress time at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's very easy for me because I live alone. So I have that, but I am one of those people where it's like, I just need to shut off now and be alone and watch brainless television and then read my book and go to bed. So that's probably like the only part of my day that the evening is probably where I'm most routined. But the rest of it is kind of like get up, make my coffee, and all right, do a little reading, do a little work, and let's see where the day takes us. So I don't know. But some people are like get up, make their bed, all that. No, I'm not that girl.
Speaking of mindless TV, I just finished Ted Lasso.
Yes.
Oh.
Did you love it?
Oh.
It's good, eh? I thought the second season was the best personally, but that was just, or maybe it was the first season. It was pandemic time when I was watching it.
The first season was incredible.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking
incredible.
of. First season.
But that's kind of the same for most things, right?
Yes.
And then it kind of, they try to stretch it out, and then maybe they find their groove, maybe they don't.
Yes.
But Ted Lasso was.
It's very good.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things where you can watch and you don't get anxiety from it or feel like it just makes you happy.
That's
like
right.
it's fun.
Yeah.
It's light. It's great.
You're laughing.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
a feel
awesome.
good kind of show.
Are there any, so it seems to me that you have been somebody that really just like, you thought about what you wanted and eventually you crushed it in one way or another.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, is there future projects? Is there future goals that, you want to hit? You already mentioned one of them.
What was the one I mentioned?
Play-by-play during playoffs, I think.
I've done that.
What was that?
I've done that. I've done Stanley Cup games, which was my very first year I got to do them, which was huge.
Okay.
For me, one of them, the one is Stanley Cup. I'd like to do the Stanley Cup in any way. I'd love to report, or, I think I'm very far away from ever getting a chance to call because it's such a luxury assignment and I'm so not ready for it and there's no need to rush to fail. So I'm very far away from that. But
I'm going to start a hashtag.
Yeah, right. No, it's a long way away, but that's okay. I just like to be part of it. And anyway, I think goals in my life, I'm trying to set less of them right now because I want to get away from being so goal structured, because I think I don't necessarily know if that's healthy for me. I've been that way my entire life where, you just said you seem like a person who has set goals and then crushed them. And that's not a bad thing, but it has taken over my life in some aspects. It has, I have left relationships and I have moved places and I have, kind of sacrificed probably some other things that I wish that I had in my life now, that I'm ready for now. I was not ready for that. Like I'm one of those people, like I never wanted children. And that's something that women have to talk about more because it's starting to become a topic, and men used to look at me and say, you're not going to have kids. Like asking me, how do you want your coffee? Which is a very personal thing to ask somebody. And we all have to stop asking women, are you going to have kids? Because you don't know. They could have been trying for 10 years and you don't know. And they might just not want them like me. Doesn't mean I don't like kids. I just didn't want them. And so being that person, I think before more women were like that, being very career focused, it was something where, it didn't, and my job being the fact that I work a lot of nights and weekends, and now I travel a great deal, during the season, it doesn't necessarily play into stability in relationships and whatnot. And so because of that, and because of being so focused on those goals and wanting to get to where I was, I don't regret it at all. But now I'm at a point where I'm more open to, if relationships, other aspects came into my life, I would be open to them because, and they would be more important to me than my career. And that's a little easier to say when you've accomplished a certain amount in your career. But I just spoke about how much I love it. But I would be willing to make compromises now, like staying in Winnipeg or moving, whatever that might be for, someone that I wasn't, or they weren't willing to do when I was younger. So, I'm just trying not to set like so many goals now because one.
Are you afraid that you'd hit them? Right? Like
I will.
Yeah.
Like
right.
that's the thing. I don't, I finished second place so much in sports when I was growing up. Now I just it's not, no. And it's not like I'm the top at everything, but I'm going to hit it. I'm going to find a way to get it done. I'm one of those people. And when I don't, and I can't even like this, I don't want this to come off the wrong way. I don't want to sound conceited, but I don't remember the last time I didn't accomplish something that I set my mind to.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
The only thing would probably be maybe in my personal life, but I've never really had goals there. So I'm kind of at a place where I'd probably rather start setting goals. Like I do have goals now. Like again, since I lost my dad, spending more time with my mom, spending more time with my sister and my very tight-knit friends, not wasting times on, going out for dinner with people that I don't really know, but I go just because I feel obligated. I don't do that shit anymore. No is a complete answer and a text message for me now. And that's a total shift for me, in the last 4 years. Oh, right. Yeah. And how many times I felt like, oh, well, I should, because I haven't seen these people and I knew them then. No, if you're my friend, you're my friend. If you're in my circle, you're in my circle. And those are the people I spend my time with. So that's a goal in my personal life now. And
so it sounds like you're kind of just, you're shifting where you're setting goals, right?
Yeah. Like that is completely it. Cause I feel good at where I am in my career, which is a nice thing to say. I don't say that out loud a lot to myself, but I'm good with it. At the end of the day, it's like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I work for the largest sports network in the world doing something that I enjoy.
Yeah.
I'm able to survive financially on my own. I can do it on my own, which is a nice feeling as well. So that's good. So I'm good there at this moment. I think when I'll have more goals is if I decide to jet out of the broadcast field. And there is something about being able in our industry to call your own shot and leave on your own terms, which doesn't happen to many people. It's also being a woman and aging on television. These are all little things that, come into play eventually. It's one of the strategic parts of play-by-play. You don't see me very much compared to when I was a host and you saw me a lot more. There's little things that, I think of in my brain about being very strategic about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it so that I can progress in certain ways and maybe have more longevity within what I do, right? So we'll see if the goals come back in the career again. But right now I'm pretty good, except for like maybe a couple things that I'd like to do before my broadcast time ends, whenever that might be. But it's much more on the personal side and they're not even goals. They're just things that I'm open to now that I wasn't open to before, and things that, like to what you said, I've shifted what I believe to be more important than say like things I would have missed before in order to go do that hockey game or that career opportunity. I won't miss them now. Yeah. Yeah.
The phrase, you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
You're coming here, probably thought a little bit about what we were going to talk about. Is there anything that's really important to you that I didn't touch on, that I didn't ask you?
I don't know. You did a
like
pretty
when
good
you're going to
job.
be the premier of Manitoba.
Yeah. Hold that one in. And it's funny because I think like it's just so strange how life just shifts so quickly, and something that seemed so important suddenly is not important at all. And you realize that. And at the same time, though, on any given day, it could be the most important thing in your life. And you kind of feel like, wow, when is it just going to get easy? That's one of the things I ask myself. It's no matter how much I've gone up in my career from the time I started in brand until now, it's harder now than it was back then, because there's expectations that I have put on myself and of other people, and you're in a bigger spotlight and all of those fun little things. But that's where the magic is, is the fact that I get to experience that every day, that it is something. But just, I don't really think there's much. I'm not a super interesting person. Like that's
I'll call your bullshit on that. We've gone about 2 hours and it seemed about 10 minutes.
But like, I feel like I just speak about, what I think I learned from my experience. I speak up. And that's the one thing. I have started to use my voice a little bit more in the hockey world than I did before. I have made some people unhappy by doing that. But it's okay, because there's a lot of other people that have reached out and been like, no, you need to keep doing this. And like, I was just in Houston giving my Not One of the Boys keynote to the energy industry. I did it in Newfoundland as well. And I've got the Winnipeg Women's Conference I'm a keynote at. And that's a bit of a different keynote than Not One of the Boys. It's more about finding your yes. And the fact that people pay me to come speak. And I have women telling me they feel seen after I'm done talking. Like the little girl from Brandon is like, I can't believe I get to have these experiences, and that, I've learned enough in my 20 years of my career and the different circumstances I've had. And truly the last 4 years have been huge. Since I started doing play-by-play and became the first, the lessons have been massive. So I really feel good about that. I'm utilizing some tough experiences to hopefully make an impact and to make change. Because if that can be my small little legacy in this world, I feel good about that.
Well, I actually have a ton more questions, but I feel like we could keep going. I really appreciate you coming. It's so nice to catch up and see you again. And I think you're a little over modest. You're very interesting. You're very
I hope so.
Inspiring. And I think a lot of people see that. So thank you so much for coming.
No, this was great.
Anytime you want to come on to talk about anything, you're more than welcome.
Well, I appreciate that. I just appreciate the offer to come and chat.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, this was good.